vehicles registered on Staten Island. It's the most recent data we have, and it's from 2016, so figure that has grown somewhat. Just keep that number in mind as we talk this morning about drowsy driving. I want to thank Alex Slacky from AAA for being here. I want to thank AAA for all of the great things they do on the drowsy driving front and anything having to do, frankly, with vehicles. They do wonderful work, and I am a big fan, and we're excited to partner with them on an issue that they've been talking about a lot longer than we have. We started recently here at Borough Hall a campaign that we call Sleep Well Staten Island, and it discusses the various implications of sleep or lack thereof on our physical, mental, and emotional health. We have been real aggressive on our social media in talking about it and trying to educate Staten Islanders. This morning we want to talk about a specific branch of that work, and that is discussing drowsy driving. I think in the last 20, 30 years, we as a society have done really great work in terms of educating the public about drunk driving. And I think a similar campaign needs to happen, certainly here on Staten Island, given the number that I referenced earlier. But we have to have a sort of cultural shift and an awareness of how many of us are sleep deprived and what that means in terms of our driving habits, and the dangers that poses. I read a book, and really it's this book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, that was the instigator for this entire Sleep Well Staten Island initiative. And I want to read a few paragraphs from the book because I think Matthew Walker says it a whole lot better than I can say, and I think it really gets to the heart of the matter. There are two main culprits of drowsy driving accidents. The first is people completely falling asleep at the wheel. This happens infrequently, however, and usually requires an individual to be acutely sleep deprived, and that he defines that as having gone without shut-eye for 24 plus hours. The second more common cause is a momentary lapse in concentration called a microsleep. These last for just a few seconds, during which time the eyelid will either partially or fully close. They are usually suffered by individuals who are chronically sleep restricted, defining as getting less than 7 hours of sleep a night on a routine basis. And I just ask those watching and those Staten Islanders who will read and watch this, do you get less than fewer than 7 hours of sleep a night? During a micro sleep, your brain becomes blind to the outside world for a brief moment, and not just the visual domain, but in all channels of perception. Most of the time you have no awareness of the event. More problematic is that your decisive control of motor actions, such as those necessary for operating a steering wheel or a brake pedal, will momentarily cease. As a result, you don't need to fall asleep for 10 or 15 seconds to die while driving. 2 seconds will do it. A 2-second microsleep at 30 miles per hour with a modest angle of drift can result in your vehicle transitioning entirely from one lane. To think about their experience on our roads between 2 and 4 p.m. They are chaotic, and that's being kind, on a daily basis. Now imagine that, and now appreciate that a number of those drivers have been sleep deprived, and a number of those drivers are potential drowsy drivers, and think about how truly chaotic our roads are at that time. Again, I want to thank everybody at AAA. I want to thank Alec for being here, for their good work, and I want to call him to the stand. To the stand. Yes, I want to call him to the stand. We're going to cross-examine him after.
Oh, well, thanks everyone for being here, and especially thank you to the borough president for making sleep health entirely a major issue for everyone on Staten Island, and for making drowsy driving in particular a featured part of that Sleep Well Staten Island initiative. My name is Alex Slack. I'm here from AAA, and I think what the borough president referenced is exactly right. We know that so many people out there are driving drowsy. They may not admit to it. They may not even know it, because how many times do you go to sleep at night, you think, I'm exhausted, I'm going to hit the pedal, I'm going to fall asleep right away, and you do. And then there are some times when you say, I'll read a book, I'll watch some TV, and you fall asleep anyway. You don't know how tired you are. And actually 50% of the people that fall asleep at the wheel, they didn't even realize that they were tired beforehand. So it's a major issue, and some of our recent studies have shown it's even more of an issue than we thought. 3 in 10 people admit to driving while they were so tired they had trouble keeping their eyes open within the last month. And those are national statistics, and certainly here on Staten Island, the 3rd longest commutes of any county in the country, you're going to have a lot of folks that are driving while they're a little bit tired as well. And the most recent study that we did looked at the federal statistics that say between 1% and 2% of crashes are related to drowsy driving. We looked at video from inside vehicles, looking at people's faces, how many times they blinked or how drowsy they were, how many times their eyes were closed, and we found that closer to 9 or 10% of crashes are related to drowsy driving. So that 45 number of crashes where people fell asleep on Staten Island last year, that's the highest that it's been, since 2009, but it's probably, a factor of 5 above that. And that's super concerning, because we know that when you drive drowsy, if you have, let's say, less than 5 hours of sleep, you're at 4 times the crash risk of someone who had at least 7 hours of sleep. And that's essentially equivalent to drunk driving. We know drunk driving is socially unacceptable, and we need to make drowsy driving as socially unacceptable. And this is really the opportune time to hold this press conference on a Monday morning, because this is when people are recovering from whatever they might have done this weekend, and they're a little bit lower energy, and it's important to remind them, you've got to take care of yourself. You have to get that sleep at night, not only for driving on the roads, for many other reasons, but particularly for driving on the roads safely, because how many threats do you deal with out on the roadways? Cars driving recklessly and aggressively, running red lights and speeding. You have to watch out for pedestrians and bicyclists and double parked cars and school buses, and there's so many threats, and you've got to be operating at maximum capacity if you're on the road, and we just can't have people that don't take that seriously. And so we know it's an epidemic. We need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. If you're going on a long trip, you got to make sure you take breaks. But on your daily commute, you have to make sure that you're getting enough sleep at night. If you need to sneak out during lunch, rather than go into the coffee shop, you go out to your car and you take a little nap. That might be something you need to do, but really make sure you focus on your safe driving. And part of safe driving is being ready to drive and being rested. So I want to thank the borough president for his remarks, and for allowing me to speak here, and for highlighting this very serious traffic safety issue. Thank you.
I want to read to you a few more data points that Dr. Walker includes in his book. This coming week, more than 2 million people in the United States will fall asleep while driving their motor vehicle. That's more than 250,000 people every day, with much more events, with more such events during the week than weekends, for obvious reasons. More than 56 million Americans admit to struggling to stay awake at the wheel of a car each month. Said another way, for every 30 seconds you've been reading this book, or for every 30 seconds of this press conference, there's been a car accident somewhere in the U.S. caused by sleeplessness. And I think Alec touched on a really important point, and it's a point that Dr. Walker makes in the book. And we don't know when we're sleep deprived, and that's a really important point. We've become so accustomed to our lack of sleep, and we've normalized it. We don't really fully understand or appreciate the fact that we aren't getting a sufficient amount of sleep. I have to read one last paragraph because I think it's really compelling. There are many things that I hope readers take away from this book. This is one of the most important. If you are drowsy while driving, please, please stop. It is lethal. To carry the burden of another's death on your shoulders is a terrible thing. Don't be misled by the many ineffective tactics people will tell you you can battle back against drowsy. Effective tactics people will tell you can battle back against drowsiness while driving. Many of us think that we can overcome drowsiness through sheer force of will, but sadly this is not true. To assume otherwise can jeopardize your life, the lives of your family, your friends in the car with you, and the lives of other road users. Some people only get one chance to fall asleep at the wheel before losing their life. And I just think if you think about what's taking place over the last several years under the de Blasio administration, and even efforts before that under the Bloomberg administration, or particularly Vision Zero, where you go specifically to problematic locations and try to find a specialized or individualized fix to that location to make it safer. Think about attacking this problem in a more fundamental way, and that is by attacking the larger universe of drivers who might pose a danger to others, and that I believe is consistent with what we're trying to do. We want to reduce the number of folks driving in a condition that makes them potentially dangerous to themselves and to others. I want to acknowledge, again, the great work of AAA. I want to acknowledge the work of Governor Cuomo in New York State. There have been efforts by the State Department of Transportation, efforts by the State Department of Health on this front. There are various PSAs that the state has done. There are these 4 radio spots, both of 30-second and 60-second duration, targeting high school students, young adults, and shift workers. 3 individual universes that are more likely to have folks driving while drowsy. I think the state of New York has done some good work on this. And I will conclude with this. There was a really good article in USA Today talking about why it's so hard to crack down on drowsy driving. And I think the last couple of paragraphs, or the last couple of sentences of the article are really a good way to conclude. Traffic safety experts are hopeful that advanced technologies such as lane departure and forward collision warnings on cars and automatic emergency braking will help prevent drowsy driving crashes. But they argue that the biggest change needs to be cultural. And I think that's what we are trying to do with our Sleep Well Staten Island front. We're talking about, again, sleep in terms of on various fronts: our health front, our educational front, and our discussion with early school start times. But certainly, given the fact that we are a car-oriented borough, given the fact, again, that we have 261,000 plus vehicles registered on Staten Island on a daily basis, I think this is time well spent to really make a concerted effort to educate Staten Islanders about the value, the importance of sleep, and the dangers posed by those folks driving who have not gotten enough sleep. So with that, I will happily open it up to any questions or comments.
I'm just curious, how are the other components of this sleep initiative going?
I think really good. I had a great conversation with Mayor de Blasio. I guess it was 4 or 5 weeks now. We had dinner on Staten Island, and at the end of the dinner, I brought up this book, and I started talking about some of the takeaways of this book. And I told him that one of the things that I wanted to talk about and really spark a conversation citywide was the science that says for middle school students and high school students, early start times are problematic, and they're actually impeding our ability to educate. And the mayor was intrigued by it and said, when the new chancellor is in place, and the new chancellor had not been named at that time, circle back to me on this front, and we will have this conversation. Now, as I said when we unveiled the Sleep Well Staten Island, and as I've said on social media and had to respond to some parents who were worried that, you know, next Monday they're going to have to make all kinds of arrangements. This is about starting a conversation. I'm very much aware of the impact on certain families. I'm very much aware of collectively bargained labor contracts. But as I've said on aerobic exercise in terms of academic performance, as I've said about the need for recess and now more students taking breaks more often, I think the science should dictate the public policy. And the mayor is open to having a conversation. When the new chancellor was named, the next day I received a phone call from him, and he already was aware of, which I thought was a good staff work, and I thought it said a lot about him that he took the time to find out what my priorities were before making the call. Aside from the usual and the obvious educational priorities, he was aware of the fact that I am a strong believer in the science of aerobic exercise, improving academic performance, and of the implications on students of lack of sleep. Again, to answer your question, I think the feedback we've gotten from the various social media posts that we've done, the various videos that we've posted, borrowing from other jurisdictions, borrowing from good stuff online, I think people are intrigued by it. I don't think the Staten Islanders were particularly thinking about the connection between sleep and their mental and physical health. The studies that just came out recently about the connection between sleep and Alzheimer's, the connections. There's a study that just came out, or news that just came out over the weekend about obesity rates, the connection between a lack of sufficient sleep and obesity. Again, the science is telling, and I think we should have a conversation about it. And so far, I think we've educated some Staten Islanders, but there is a whole lot of work to do, and we will continue to talk about it. And again, when you take a step back and you see just how impactful it is on all aspects of Staten Islanders' lives, I think it's time well spent by us as a team.
And I just would love if maybe go over one more time about how you guys figured out that the rate was closer to 9-10% rather than 1-2%.
Sure. So what we did is we used cameras that were positioned both inside and outside the vehicle, and you look at how you actually go frame by frame for 3 minutes preceding a crash, and we had people coding every single frame. Are someone's eyes open or are they closed? And I think it's called the per-class method of determining drowsiness, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But if you're over a certain threshold, I believe 12% of frames, your eyes are closed, then you're coded as being drowsy. And that's a method that's used in a variety of sleep research. And we found that actually about 10% of crashes had people coded as being drowsy. And it really is an issue of how can you determine if someone's drowsy after an average crash, because they might not admit it, they might not know it. And it's difficult, near impossible to enforce any sort of drowsy driving restriction.